"Get out of my way, you useless piece of trash." Bradley Harrison's hand swung up and came down hard across Margaret Volkoff's face. The older woman staggered back, the teacup in her hand slipping free and crashing to the floor, shattering into fragments. The entire Rosie's diner froze in that instant. Plates stopped clinking. Conversations died off. Every eye swung toward the man in the expensive suit standing in the middle of the diner, wearing that arrogant look as if he had just stepped on an annoying ant. Margaret Volkoff lifted a hand to her cheek, where the red mark was already beginning to bloom, but she did not cry. She did not beg. Her eyes held Bradley's with a strange calm, as though she was seeing something he could not. And then, before anyone could even react, a small figure stepped forward and placed herself between them. Elena Martinez, a 27-year-old waitress, with brown hair neatly tied back and a faded, worn apron, stood there with shoulders trembling slightly, but her gaze did not waver. "Do not you dare lay a hand on her again." Her voice cut through the deadly silence of the diner. Bradley Harrison blinked, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. Then he laughed, a cold laugh soaked in contempt. "Well, look what we have here. A minimum wage girl trying to play the hero." He took one step closer, his tall frame swallowing Elena's space. "What is your name, sweetheart, so I know whose life to ruin?" Elena did not back up. She stayed right there, between Bradley and Margaret, like a wall that was small, but solid. "My name is Elena Martinez, and you have no right to hit anyone in this diner." Bradley tilted his head, his eyes sweeping Elena from head to toe with disgust. "You think anyone cares about people like you? You are invisible, replaceable at any time. You are nothing." He punched each word as if he were hammering nails into a coffin. "You are just a number on a payroll that this owner can erase whenever she wants. You have no money, no power, nothing, and you still dare to stand in front of me." Elena swallowed. Her heart was pounding like madness in her chest. She knew he was right about her situation. She had nothing at all. But that was exactly why she had nothing to lose. "I would rather be a nobody who acts than someone who has everything and does nothing." The sentence locked Bradley in place for a single second. Then his face twisted with rage. No one, not a single person, dared to speak to Bradley Harrison that way. The second slap of the day rang out. This time it landed on Elena's cheek. She reeled, nearly falling, but forced herself upright. The metallic taste of blood spread across her lips. Rosa, the owner, screamed from behind the counter. A few customers shot to their feet, but no one dared come closer, because they knew who Bradley Harrison was, because they knew what he could do to their lives with a single phone call. The strangest thing happened right after that. Margaret Volkoff, the woman who had just been slapped, did not seem to care about her own injury at all. She stepped to Elena's side, worry filling her eyes. "My child," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You do not know what you have just done." Elena did not understand. She had only protected an older woman being bullied. What could possibly be wrong with that? Bradley Harrison adjusted his cuff, regaining his composure. He looked at Elena and Margaret with eyes that promised nightmares. "You will both regret ever being born." Then he turned and walked out, the diner door slamming behind him. Elena stood there, lifting a hand to the cheek that burned and throbbed. Around her, phones were still held up, recording everything. She did not know that within a few hours, this video would spread across social media. She did not see the older man seated in the corner, lifting his phone, his voice low and urgent. She did not know that in only 30 minutes, her name would reach the ears of the most dangerous man on the east coast of the United States. And she had absolutely no idea that by protecting a stranger, she had just painted a target on the backs of everyone she loved. Have you ever witnessed someone destroy their own future with a single moment of arrogance? If this story touches you, please hit like and share to spread the message. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to follow what happens next with Elena and the secret of the woman she just saved. Half a city away, in a sealed room where the most dangerous men on the East Coast sat around a table, Alexander Volkov was listening to a report on a multi-million-dollar deal. He was 36, black hair swept back, ice-cold blue eyes, and a small scar through his left eyebrow that was the only trace of a blood-soaked past. No one in that room dared meet his gaze for more than 3 seconds. No one spoke until he allowed it. This was Alexander Volkov's world, where a nod could spare a life and a frown could end everything. The door flew open without warning. Viktor Petrov, Alex's right hand, a 50-year-old man with a past as a former intelligence operative, stepped in with his face drained white. That alone made everyone in the room go still. Viktor never looked worried. Viktor never interrupted the boss. Not unless something was serious. "Boss, your mother, right now." Only 4 words, but those 4 words were enough to make Alexander Volkov rise to his feet, every discussion of money and power suddenly meaningless. Victor handed him a phone, the screen playing a video. Alexander looked. He watched the man in the expensive suit insult his mother. He watched the slap land across the face of the woman who had given birth to him, raised him, taught him everything about love and compassion. He watched his mother stagger, the teacup exploding on the floor. Alexander's face showed nothing, but his eyes, those blue eyes that were usually ice cold, were now lit with something even more frightening than anger. It was the stillness before the storm. Then he saw the girl, the small waitress stepping forward to stand between his mother and the attacker. He watched her stand there, trembling, but not retreating. He heard her say the words no one in that room would dare say to a powerful man. And he watched her take the second slap in his mother's place. The phone in Alexander's hand crumpled. He had crushed it with his bare hand without even realizing. Blood seeped into his palm where shards of glass bit into flesh, but he felt no pain. Who is he? His voice was not a question. It was a death sentence spoken into silence. Victor swallowed. Bradley Harrison III. Attorney. Old aristocratic blood. No ties to us. Alexander nodded slowly, filing the name into a special compartment of his mind, the one reserved for people who would pay. And the girl. Elena Martinez. Waitress. Nobody. Alexander turned back to Victor. And in that moment the man who had once been a seasoned intelligence operative lowered his head to avoid his boss's eyes. She protected my mother. She is not nobody anymore. 30 minutes later, Alexander was standing in the living room of the house where his mother lived. Margaret Volkov sat in an armchair, a fresh cup of tea in her hand, her cheek still red from the slap. She was 68, silver hair pinned into a neat bun, and her eyes still bright with intelligence despite all the storms her life had endured. She was the widow of the man who had built the Volkov empire from nothing, and the mother of the man now carrying that empire forward. Alexander knelt beside her, both hands closing around her wrinkled hand. "Mother, I am fine." Margaret smiled, her hand stroking her son's hair the way she had when he was a child. But that girl, Alexander, she took a hit for me. A complete stranger. Alexander clenched his jaw. "I will handle Harrison." Margaret tightened her grip on her son's hand, her gaze turning stern. "Justice, not blood. Promise me." The room sank into silence. Alexander looked at his mother, the woman who had taught him that real strength did not come from violence, but from restraint. 10 seconds passed like 10 years. "I promise." At last, he said, his voice low and solid. "But he will fall." Margaret nodded, knowing it was the best compromise she was going to get from her son. When Alexander left his mother's house, Victor was already waiting outside. "Find everything on Harrison," Alexander ordered as he got into the car. "Every sin, every secret, every skeleton in his closet." "Yes, boss. And protect that girl. From a distance. Do not let her know." Victor nodded, but something in his eyes made Alexander pause. What if Harrison moves on her first? Alexander stared out through the car window, where the city was slowly sinking into darkness. Then God help him. But what Alexander did not know was that Bradley Harrison had already started moving a long time ago. The moment he left Rosie's, the attorney had memorized the name on the waitress's name tag, and by the next morning, he would know everything about Elena Martinez, including her only weakness, a 17-year-old sister named Sophia. The video from Rosie's Diner spread like wildfire. In only 12 hours, the hashtag Rosie's Diner climbed into the top trending spot across every social media platform. Millions of people watched the moment Bradley Harrison slapped an older woman, then slapped the waitress who dared to step forward and protect her. The comments flooded in with outrage. People demanded justice. People wanted to know who the man in the suit was. But Bradley Harrison was not worried at all. Sitting in his law office on the 42nd floor of the most luxurious building in the city, he scrolled through the furious reactions with a disdainful smile. He had survived scandals far worse than this. He had the best team of lawyers money could buy. He had connections to judges, politicians, and people with power. A viral clip? Just a storm in a teacup. It would pass, like everything else. What bothered Bradley more was the waitress, Elena Martinez. Her name kept circling his mind like a scratch on the side of a brand new Bentley. He was not used to being humiliated in public. He was not used to anyone daring to look him in the eye and say no. He hired someone to investigate, and within a few hours, he had every piece of information he needed. Elena Martinez, 27 years old, orphaned at 19 when her parents died in a car accident, $47,000 in unpaid hospital debt, working 2 jobs to support a 17-year-old sister in her final year of high school. living in a cheap studio apartment in a not-so-safe part of the city. Bradley finished the file and smiled. Perfect. She has everything to lose. And so the war began. Day 1. Elena was clearing tables when 2 police officers walked into the diner. They asked her about the assault at Rosie's diner, but not as a victim. They questioned her as a suspect. Bradley Harrison had filed a complaint accusing her of assault. According to his statement, Elena attacked him first, and he only defended himself. Elena stood there with her mouth open, unable to believe what she was hearing. He had reversed everything. He had turned the victim into the perpetrator. Day 2. Elena's phone rang. Her landlord called, his voice unusually cold. "Someone is asking about your lease, Ms. Martinez. They want to know if you have violated any terms. I think you should prepare yourself." Day 3. Sophia's school called. "We have found an issue with your sister's scholarship paperwork. We need to verify the family income source again. If it is not resolved within 2 weeks, the scholarship may be revoked." Elena slid down onto the floor of her tiny apartment, knees drawn to her chest, fighting not to cry. Sophia was at school, and Elena did not want her sister to see her like this. Everything was collapsing. Her job, her home, Sophia's future. All because she had dared to stand up for a stranger. She did not know who to ask for help. She had no family besides Sophia, no friends with influence, no money to hire a lawyer. She had only herself, and that was all she would use. Day 4. Elena went to the police station alone. She brought every piece of evidence she had, from the video online to the threatening messages she had received from an unknown number. She explained every detail, her voice shaking but her resolve unbroken. The officer took notes, but his eyes told her this would not be easy. Bradley Harrison had too many connections. She called Sophia's school, explained the situation, begged for more time. She took extra shifts, working 14 hours a day to set aside whatever money she could for what was coming. She did not sleep. She barely ate, but she did not quit. Rosa, the owner of Rosie's diner, watched her with worried eyes. The 55-year-old woman had treated Elena like a daughter from the day Elena walked in 3 years ago asking for a job. "Elena, my child, let me help. You can't fight people like that alone." Elena shook her head, forcing a reassuring smile. "This is my fight, Rosa. I will not drag anyone down into this mud with me." But Bradley Harrison did not stop. He did not just want Elena to suffer. He wanted her to lose everything. 1 week after the incident, Bradley's attorney appeared at Rosie's diner. The man in the gray suit walked in with a fake smile and a leather briefcase stuffed with paperwork. He demanded to speak to Rosa in private. "Mrs. Delgado, my client would like to make a generous offer. Fire Elena Martinez, and everything ends here. Your diner will be left in peace. If not," he set a thick packet on the table, "this place will be shut down within 30 days. Rosa looked at the packet, then looked at the attorney with the same stare she had reserved for bullies through 30 years of running her business. "Get out of my diner." The attorney shrugged, as if he had expected the answer. "Your choice. We gave you an opportunity." That night, while Elena was wiping down tables to prepare for closing, a city official showed up. He taped a notice to the glass door. Elena stepped closer to read it, and her heart seemed to stop. A health inspection notice. 47 violations. Immediate closure pending review. Elena knew exactly who was behind it. She was fighting a war with no weapons, no allies, and no hope. But she would not run. The next morning, Elena and Rosa stood in front of the sealed doors of Rosie's diner. The closure notice was still taped to the glass, its red lettering like an open wound pressed against the hearts of both women. Inside, the chairs were still neatly arranged, the tables still polished, clean, and the scent of coffee seemed to linger in the air, as if the place had simply paused mid-breath. 30 years Rosa had built this, 30 years serving the community, and now it could all collapse because one man with money and power wanted revenge. Elena felt as if someone had wrapped a hand around her heart and was squeezing. She told Rosa that this was her fault, that she was sorry, that she was so sorry, and her voice tightened, tears swelling close to the surface. Rosa turned to her, and in the older woman's eyes there burned a fire Elena had never seen before. Rosa said no, this was his fault, and Elena was not to dare apologize. Did she hear? Because Elena had done the right thing. Elena had protected a woman being bullied. That was something to be proud of, not something to beg forgiveness for. Rosa gripped Elena by the shoulders, her voice firm. She said she had run this diner for 30 years. She had faced economic downturns, a pandemic, every kind of hardship, and she would not let a bastard like Bradley Harrison defeat her. And Elena would not let him defeat her either. Elena nodded and wiped her tears, and inside her a decision settled into place. She could not keep waiting for Bradley to strike again. She had to face him directly. She did not know how yet, but she would find a way. That night, Elena left Sophia's apartment to take a walk, trying to put her thoughts back into some kind of order. She moved through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, where the streetlights flickered weakly and darkness claimed most of the space between pools of light. She was thinking about how to approach Bradley, whether any lawyer might take her case for free, how she could shield Sophia from the storm bearing down on them. She did not notice the black car rolling slowly behind her, not until it pulled up and stopped right beside her. Elena froze. Her heart hammered wildly as the car door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a black suit, black hair swept back, and cold blue eyes catching the glow of the streetlight. There was something about him that made Elena want to run. A quiet power, a danger hidden beneath a shell of courtesy. She stepped back, her hand closing around the keys in her pocket, ready to use them as a weapon if she had to. The man told her he had not come to hurt her. His voice was low and steady, as if he was used to frightening people and just as used to calming them. He said he was the son of Margaret, the woman at the diner. Elena blinked. The older woman she had protected. She remembered the calm in that woman's eyes, and the strange words that Elena did not know what she had just done. Now, the pieces began to fit together. Elena asked if Margaret was all right. The man said his mother was fine, because of Elena. He stepped closer, and Elena realized he was even taller than she had first thought. He said Elena had protected his mother. Elena had taken a blow in her place, and he wanted to repay her. Elena frowned, her instincts still on guard. She asked how. He offered the best lawyer in the city, free, money to cover her expenses while the case was resolved, and protection, so that Harrison could not touch her or anyone she cared about. It was an offer so generous it did not feel real. Too generous. Elena had lived long enough in this world to know nothing came free. She asked why, and what he wanted from her. The man, Alexander, tilted his head as if she had asked something genuinely interesting. He said nothing at all, that she had helped his mother, and this was how he said thank you. Elena shook her head. She said she did not know who he was, she did not trust him, and she would not take charity from a stranger. Alexander lifted his brows slightly, as if he was not used to being refused. He told her Harrison would crush her. Harrison had money, power, connections Elena could not imagine. Elena could not win alone. Elena looked straight into those cold blue eyes, and she did not flinch. She told him to let Harrison try. She had survived worse. Then she turned and walked away without looking back. Her heart still pounded out of control, but her steps stayed steady. She did not know who that man was. She did not know what he truly wanted, and she had no intention of finding out. Alexander stood there watching the small figure of Elena fade into the dark. Victor stepped out of the car, his face unable to hide his surprise. He said she refused, that no one refused them. Alexander did not answer right away. He kept staring in the direction Elena had gone, his eyes thoughtful. He said she was not afraid of Harrison, and she was not afraid of him either. Silence held for a moment, and then he spoke again. He told Victor to protect her, from a distance, and not to let her know. Victor asked about Harrison. Alexander opened the car door, his voice ice cold. He told Victor to start the machine, quietly, legally, and he wanted Harrison bleeding before he even realized he had been cut. Elena Martinez had just refused the help of the Volkov family. No one had ever done that before. Alexander did not know whether he should be impressed or furious. But one thing was certain. He could not take his eyes off her anymore. The Volkov machine began to move in silence. Alexander had promised his mother there would be no blood spilled, and he kept that promise. But that did not mean Bradley Harrison would be left in peace. The Volkov organization did not need violence to destroy a man. They had weapons far more refined than that: influence, phone calls placed in the dead hours of night, soft conversations between powerful men, inside gated, private clubs, delicate reminders about favors still unpaid. No one forced anyone to do anything. There were only suggestions, considerations, voluntary decisions whose outcomes all tilted toward a single target. The first day, Bradley's largest partner law firm abruptly announced they needed to reconsider the relationship. No specific reason, only strategic restructuring. The second day, the bank where Bradley kept his money called to say they had discovered certain irregularities in his financial file and needed to conduct a comprehensive audit. The third day, an investigative journalist received an envelope with no sender name, packed with documents about 5 sexual harassment cases Bradley had settled out of court over the past 20 years. The dominoes started to fall, and Bradley Harrison did not even know the game had begun. Meanwhile, Elena did not sit still and wait for fate. She went to the Community Legal Aid Center, a nonprofit organization that specialized in helping people who could not afford an attorney. She sat in the waiting room for 4 hours, turning an old, worn magazine over and over without truly reading, until her name was called. David Chen, the lawyer assigned to her case, was a young man around 30 with bright eyes and a stack of files piled high on his desk. He listened as Elena told the whole story, from the slap at Rosie's diner to the order shutting the place down, taking careful notes and nodding now and then. When Elena finished, David leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. He said the case was hard, that Bradley Harrison had connections she could not imagine, that he had escaped allegations far more serious than this. Elena felt her heart sink. She asked if there was no hope. David said he was not saying that. He leaned forward, his eyes lighting up. He said the video was strong evidence. Millions had seen it, and public opinion was on her side. If they played their cards right, they could turn this into a nightmare for Harrison. Elena looked straight into the young lawyer's eyes and told him to use it. Across the city, Bradley Harrison was beginning to feel that something was wrong. It started with a call from Jeffrey, his longtime partner, apologizing and saying they had to stop working together. Not personal, only that circumstances had changed. Then came the country club where Bradley had been a member for 20 years. They forgot to renew his membership card. Then clients began canceling contracts, one by one, with vague reasons and polished apologies. And worst of all were the articles. An investigative reporter named Sarah Chen published the first piece about the harassment history of a famous attorney. The article did not name him, but the details were clear enough that everyone knew exactly who it was about. Bradley slammed his desk in his office, his face flushed with rage, demanding to know who was doing this. Who? He called his connections and ordered them to investigate. And the answer froze the blood in his veins. Margaret Volkov, the woman he had slapped at the diner. She was the widow of Dmitry Volkov, the most notorious mafia boss on the East Coast 20 years ago. And her son, Alexander Volkov, was now running that empire. Volkov, Bradley whispered the name like a curse. The son is behind all of this. He sat in the office darkness for a long time, his mind calculating with frantic speed. Volkov had power, money, connections Bradley could not touch. If this became a direct war, he would lose. But Bradley Harrison had not become one of the most powerful attorneys in the city by playing fair. He opened a drawer and pulled out the file on Elena Martinez his people had gathered. He flipped through the pages until he stopped at a photograph. Sofia Martinez, 17 years old, a senior student, living with her sister, walking home alone every day after school. If Volkov wants war, I will give him war. Bradley smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. But first, I will destroy everything that little waitress loves. He stared at Sophia's photograph, his finger tapping lightly against the glossy surface. Bradley Harrison had built his entire career on ruining other people. He knew exactly where to strike to cause the maximum pain. And Elena Martinez's weakness was a 17-year-old girl who walked home alone every day after the school day ended. Sofia Martinez stepped out through the school gates with her backpack on her shoulder, her mind still crowded with numbers from the morning math test. She was 17, with brown hair like her sister's, bright eyes full of dreams, and a smile Elena always said looked exactly like their mother's. Today was ordinary, like so many days before it. School let out. She walked home through familiar streets, thinking about unfinished homework and the college entrance exams drawing closer. Sofia wanted to go to medical school, the way her sister had once dreamed before she had to drop out to raise her. The girl had promised herself she would study hard, she would get into college, she would become a doctor, so that one day Elena would not have to work 14 hours a day anymore. She was thinking about what she would cook for dinner when a black car pulled up beside her. Sofia did not pay much attention, assuming it belonged to someone in the neighborhood. Not until 2 men stepped out and blocked her path. "Sofia Martinez?" one of them asked, his voice cold as steel. Sofia took a step back, instinct warning her that something was wrong. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Your sister has a debt with our boss," the second man said as he moved closer, and Sofia saw leather gloves on his hands. "We are here to remind her of that." Sofia turned to run, but she did not make it. Half a city away, Elena was working at a small diner where Rosa had helped place her temporarily while Rosie's diner waited to reopen. She was carrying a tray of food to a table when the phone in her pocket vibrated, an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something pushed her to answer. "Ms. Martinez, I am calling from Street Mary Hospital. Your sister, Sofia Martinez, is here. You need to come right away." The tray slipped from Elena's hands. Plates shattered, food splattered, but she did not hear a thing. She did not see a thing. The world around her vanished, leaving only the echo of those words inside her head. Sophia. Hospital. Come right away, Elena ran. She ran out of the diner without saying a single word to anyone. She ran through crowded streets, cutting through the flow of people, nearly hit by a car when she crossed without looking. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to fold. Street. Mary Hospital rose ahead of her like a white fortress. Elena burst into the emergency room and grabbed the sleeve of the first nurse she saw. Sophia Martinez. My sister. Where is she? They led her to a room at the far end of the hall. Elena pushed the door open and froze. Sophia lay on the hospital bed, motionless. The angelic face of the girl was bruised and swollen now. One eye could not open. Her lips were split, streaked with dried blood. Her left arm was in a cast, raised and suspended. Elena did not know how she reached the bedside. Her knees gave way, and with shaking hands she took Sophia's uninjured hand. She heard the doctor saying something behind her, words like beaten, found in an alley, passerby called emergency services, but it all became meaningless noise in her ears. And then Elena cried. For the first time since the day she stood beside her parents' grave 8 years ago, she cried. The tears poured like water, her shoulders shaking with sobs, and she lowered her head beside her sister's bed and cried as if she had never been allowed to cry before. Sophia opened her eyes. The eye that was not swollen blinked a few times before she recognized who was at her side. Sister, she rasped, her voice weak and raw. Elena lifted her head, wiping at her tears too quickly, as if she did not want her sister to see her break. I am here. I am here now. You are okay. You will be okay. Sister, they said. Sophia tried to speak, each word costing her pain. They said you have to stop. Who? Who did this to you? Elena tightened her grip on Sophia's hand, her voice trembling as she fought to contain the fury boiling inside her. They said, withdraw the complaint, or next time, it will be worse. Sophia closed her eyes again, exhausted by the effort of talking. Elena sat there, looking at her sister, the sister she had sworn to protect at any cost, now battered on a hospital bed because of her, because she had dared to stand, because she had dared not to bow her head. She called the police. They came, took notes, promised to investigate. But Elena knew there would be no result. No cameras in the alley where Sophia had been found, no witnesses, and Bradley Harrison, as always, had a perfect alibi. He had been at a charity event, filmed live at the exact time Sophia was attacked. Elena knew who was behind it, but she could not prove it. Somewhere else in the city, Viktor Petrov walked into Alexander Volkov's office with a face as pale as paper. He rarely showed worry, but today, even a hardened soldier like him could not hide his unease. Boss, the girl's sister was attacked. Alexander had been reading a financial report, but those words locked him in place. He looked up, his blue eyes darkening. Where were our people? Victor swallowed. They lost her for 10 minutes. Harrison's people moved fast. 10 minutes. Alexander rose, his voice calm in a way that was terrifying. 10 minutes. Then he exploded. The glass table was shoved aside, papers flying across the room. The expensive leather chair slammed into the wall. The computer monitor shattered beneath his fist. Victor stood perfectly still, not daring to move, until Alexander finally stopped, breathing hard, both hands bleeding from the cuts of broken glass. I promised my mother there would be no blood spilled, Alexander whispered, his voice trembling with restraint. But this, boss? Victor asked softly, unsure what order he would receive. Alexander turned to his right hand, eyes cold as ice and dark as a moonless night. Find the ones who did this. Do not kill them, but make sure they will never be able to use their hands again. That night, Elena sat beside Sophia's bed, holding her sister's hand until morning. She did not sleep. She did not cry anymore. She only sat there, staring at the bruised face of her sister, and let the fire inside her smolder into something far more dangerous than anger. When the first light of dawn poured through the hospital window, Elena had made her decision. No more running. No more hiding. No more playing by the rules. Bradley Harrison wanted a war. She would give him a war he would never forget. The Volkov Industries building rose over the city's financial district like a monument to power and wealth. Elena stood before the massive glass doors, tipping her head back to stare up at the dizzying height, and she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. But she had not come here to feel small. She had come because of Sophia. She stepped into the lobby, her worn shoes in sharp contrast to the gleaming marble floor and the expensive suits moving past her. 2 tall security guards stopped her at once. Do you have an appointment? One of them asked, his voice cool, his eyes raking over her from head to toe, as if she were a stain on this beautiful floor. Elena did not flinch. "Tell Mr. Volkov that Elena Martinez is here. He will want to see me." The guards exchanged a look, doubt plain on their faces. But one of them still lifted the phone, spoke a few words, then fell silent to listen. His expression shifted, from contempt to surprise, then to something like respect. 30 seconds later, Elena was escorted into a private elevator and taken straight to the top floor. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped into a vast office with glass walls framing a sweeping view of the city. Alexander Volkov stood with his back to the door, looking down at the streets that seemed so small from up here. When he heard Elena's footsteps, he turned, and she realized his blue eyes were no longer as cold as they had been that night on the street. There was something else in them now. Perhaps respect, perhaps curiosity. "You said you wanted to help me." Elena spoke first, her voice steady, even as her heart slammed against her ribs. "Is that offer still standing?" Alexander tipped his head, studying her. "What changed?" "He hurt my sister." Elena felt her voice tremble slightly when she said Sophia's name, but she held it in. "The only family I have left in this world." "I know," Alexander said, and his voice softened a fraction. "I am sorry. My people should have been able to protect her." Elena went still. "Your people?" Alexander did not dodge her gaze. "I had people watching and protecting you after that night, after you refused my help." "You were watching me?" Elena felt anger flare in her chest. "You had people spying on my life without telling me?" "I was trying to keep you safe," Alexander answered, his tone holding no excuse. "And I failed. My people lost your sister for 10 minutes, and Harrison used that window. That is on me." Elena wanted to scream at him. She wanted to blame someone, anyone, for the pain Sophia had endured. But when she looked into Alexander's eyes, she saw real regret there, and she knew that no matter how furious she was, he was not her enemy. "I do not want your protection," Elena said, her voice calmer now. "I want justice." "What kind of justice?" "The legal kind." Elena met his gaze without wavering. "I want him in prison. I want him to lose everything. I want him to feel what Sophia felt." Alexander was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "That, I can do. But I have conditions," Elena continued, not giving him room to interrupt. "Tell me. I lead this. You provide resources. I make the decisions. And when it is over, I do not owe you anything." Alexander raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest crossing his blue eyes. "You are setting terms with me?" "Yes. Take it or leave it." Silence stretched between them. Elena held his gaze and did not back down, even though she knew the man in front of her had the kind of power that made an entire city tremble. At last, Alexander smiled, a small and rare smile. "Deal." Elena let out a breath, but she did not let it show. She turned as if to leave, but something made her stop. "Why do you care this much?" she asked, looking back at him. "This is not just about repaying a debt. I can see that." Alexander did not answer right away. He turned toward the window, where the city lay spread beneath them like a map of dreams and nightmares. "My father was killed when I was 15, he said, his voice dropping, heavy with painful memory, betrayed by someone he trusted. From that day on, I swore I would never let anyone hurt the people I care about again." Something inside Elena trembled. She understood that kind of pain, the pain of losing someone you love, and the helplessness of not being able to protect them. "I am not someone you care about," she said quietly. "You do not even know me." Alexander turned back to her, and this time, in those cold blue eyes, Elena saw something warmer. "No, but I am starting to." Elena did not know what to say. She stood there for a moment, in that vast office with the most powerful man on the East Coast, and felt her world shifting in ways she could not yet understand. At last, she only nodded and turned to go. It was not a partnership, not a friendship, not anything that could be named. But when Elena Martinez walked out of that office, she walked out with an entire army at her back. And Bradley Harrison had no idea what was coming. In Alexander Volkov's office, Viktor Petrov was laying out the most detailed plan the organization had ever prepared for a civilian target. On the desk lay a thick file on Bradley Harrison, from the harassment cases settled out of court to the suspicious financial dealings. A list of the best attorneys in the city was ready, people who would work for free on the strength of a single call from Volkov. Witnesses had been identified and approached. Evidence had been gathered and arranged with perfect precision. "Harrison will not even know what hit him," Victor said, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had won countless shadow wars. "We have everything we need to bury him." Alexander nodded, his eyes moving over the paperwork. "Good. When do we move?" Waiting for your order, boss. Alexander looked up, and Victor realized his boss's eyes were not as they usually were. Elena decides, not me. Victor opened his mouth to speak, but the office door opened, and Elena Martinez walked in. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes showing she had not slept much since Sophia was admitted to the hospital. But her steps were still steady, and her gaze still burned with determination. Alexander rose. We are ready. The best lawyers, airtight evidence, witnesses ready. Harrison has no way out. Elena looked at the stack of files, then lifted her eyes to Alexander. I appreciate everything, but I can't use it. Alexander blinked, not sure he had heard her right. What? If I win with your power, then Bradley is the one who truly wins, Elena said, her voice calm but unyielding. He will say I was bought, that the Volkov family rigged the game, that this is not justice but mafia revenge, and people will believe him. Does that matter? He will still go to prison. It matters to me. Elena held Alexander's gaze. I need to beat him my way, with my own hands, with truth, not power. The room fell silent. Victor looked to his boss, waiting for a reaction. Alexander stood there, his face unreadable, and Elena wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. All right, Alexander said at last, his voice softening. Do it your way. But if you need anything at all, anytime, you know where to find me. Elena nodded and left, leaving Victor staring after her with his mouth slightly open. In the days that followed, Elena worked like a woman possessed. By day, she kept her shifts at the temporary diner, earning money to cover Sophia's hospital bills. By night, she became a detective, tracing every thread in Bradley Harrison's past. She found the names of the women Bradley had harmed over the last 20 years, names buried under non-disclosure agreements and hush money. But Elena was not Volkov. She did not have the power to force anyone to speak. She had only her sincerity. The first person she approached was Rebecca, a young attorney who had left the profession after Bradley harassed her 10 years ago. Elena went to her small apartment in the suburbs, knocked, and waited. When Rebecca opened the door, her eyes were guarded. I do not know who you are, and I do not want to talk. I am Elena Martinez, Elena said quickly before the door could close. Bradley Harrison slapped me in front of an entire diner. Then he had my sister beaten until her arm broke. She is only 17. Rebecca stopped, her hand still on the door. I saw your video. I am sorry about your sister. I did not come for pity, Elena said. I came because I know he hurt you too, and I know he will keep doing this to others, unless we stop him together. Rebecca looked at Elena for a long time, then opened the door wider. Come in. That was the beginning. From Rebecca, Elena found Sarah, a former secretary Bradley had harassed and then fired when she dared to push back. From Sarah, she found Michelle, a partner attorney Bradley had threatened to destroy if she reported him. 3 women, 3 different stories, and the same predator at the center of all of them. Elena sat with each one, listening as they spoke of pain and fear they had carried for years. She promised nothing. She only told the truth. I will bring this into the light. With you or without you, I will do it. But if we stand together, our voices will be stronger. He can't silence all of us. 1 week later, all 3 agreed to testify. Elena reached out to Sarah Chen, the investigative reporter who had written the first piece about Bradley. But this time, she did not need an anonymous source or documents slipped under the table. She had 3 women ready to tell their stories in public, and she had herself. This will be a big story, Sarah Chen said when she met Elena in a small coffee shop. But Harrison will strike back. Are you ready for that? I have been ready for a long time. In the Volkov Industries office, Victor was reporting Elena's activity to Alexander. She is doing everything on her own. Our media connections, our legal system connections. She is not using any of it. I know. Alexander said, eyes on the window. This could fail. I know. So why are you smiling, boss? Alexander turned, and Victor realized it was the first real smile he had seen on his boss's face since Alexander's father died. Because she is braver than anyone I have ever met. Across the city, Bradley Harrison sat in his dark office, reading a report from his private investigators. His old victims were speaking to one another. The media was digging into his past, and all of it was starting from a waitress he had thought he could crush with a flick of his finger. That bitch, Bradley ground out through clenched teeth. She is building a case against me. He threw the packet onto his desk, his eyes lit with rage and something like sick excitement. Fine. If she wants to play lawyer, I will show her what the real game looks like. Elena Martinez was fighting a billionaire with nothing but truth. No money, no power, no Volkov army, Only her voice, and the voices of the women Bradley had silenced for years. It should have been suicide. But sometimes, the strongest weapon is a person who has nothing left to lose. Sarah Chen's article hit the front page at 6 a.m, with a headline stamped in bold red letters, "The Predator in the Suit. Inside 20 years of Bradley Harrison's history of abuse." Beneath the headline was a photo of Bradley, that familiar self-satisfied smile on his lips, and beside it 5 smaller photographs of 5 women who had bravely stepped forward to tell their stories. Elena Martinez, Rebecca Torres, Sarah Williams, Michelle Chen, and Jennifer Blake, a former assistant Elena had found at the last possible moment. 5 women, 20 years of silence, and now all of them speaking. The article was not made of empty accusations. Sarah Chen had worked like a woman possessed over the past 2 weeks, verifying every detail, gathering proof. An email from 10 years ago in which Bradley threatened to destroy Rebecca's career if she ever opened her mouth. Text messages sent to Jennifer at 2 a.m, with content that made the reader's skin crawl. Records of secret payments tied to out-of-court settlements. And the video from Rosie's diner, analyzed frame by frame, showing with brutal clarity who the attacker was and who the victim was. The article spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had been shared millions of times, quoted by every major national outlet, and the hashtag Justice for the Victims climbed to the #1 spot across every social media platform. Bradley Harrison, the man who had once believed himself untouchable, was drowning in a sea of fire he had created with his own hands. The domino effect began at a dizzying speed. In the morning, 3 senior partners at Bradley's law firm resigned at once, declaring they could not continue to be associated with an individual facing allegations that serious. At noon, clients began pulling contracts, one by one, then in groups, until Bradley's office felt as empty as a graveyard. In the afternoon, Bradley's personal attorney, the man who had protected him for 15 years, called to say he was withdrawing. He told Brad he could not represent him anymore, not after what had been made public. Evening delivered the killing blow. Victoria Harrison, Bradley's wife of 20 years, filed for divorce. In the filing, she cited an unforgivable betrayal and demanded custody of their children along with most of their shared assets. And when night fell, the district attorney appeared on television and announced an official investigation into Bradley Harrison for assault, threats, harassment, and possibly even hiring someone to injure Sofia Martinez. Police arrived at Bradley's office at 10 p.m. He was sitting alone in the dark, a whiskey bottle half empty on the desk. When they knocked, Bradley stood, straightened his tie, and stepped out wearing the calm he had practiced for decades. He told the officer who was reading him his Miranda rights that he would be out within an hour, and asked whether they knew who he was. They brought him to court for a bail hearing the next morning. Bradley appeared in an expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, and a confident smile as if he were walking into a business meeting instead of a criminal proceeding. His new lawyer, hired in a rush after the previous one withdrew, filed for bail in the amount of $500,000. The judge, a silver-haired woman with eyes sharp as blades, looked down at Bradley. She said bail was denied, and the defendant was considered a flight risk. Bradley blinked, unable to believe what he had just heard. He addressed the judge, saying he was a respected member of the legal community, that he had a home, a family, a career in this city, and no reason to run. The judge cut him off. She told Mr. Harrison that she knew exactly who he was, that she had read the article, that she had watched the video, and that she had seen how he treated others when he believed no one could touch him, and that was precisely why he would stay right here. The gavel came down. Bradley Harrison, powerful attorney, member of elite clubs, husband to a beautiful wife and father of 2 children, was led away in handcuffs like an ordinary criminal. In the hospital room, Elena sat beside Sophia's bed, her eyes fixed on the small television mounted on the wall. She watched Bradley being cuffed, watched his face warp with shock and fury, and she did not feel the thrill she had thought she would feel. There was only relief, and a deep exhaustion that went all the way to the bone. Sophia, her face still bruised but less swollen now, took her sister's hand. She told Elena that she did it. Elena shook her head and said not yet. This was only the beginning. Her phone vibrated. A message from the contact saved as A. Volkov. He told her she played it clean, but Bradley would strike back in court, and she should be ready. Elena read the message, then looked out the hospital window, where the city was waking into a new day. She knew Alexander was right. Bradley Harrison had built his entire career on destroying other people inside courtrooms. Now he was about to face a trial as the defendant. And he still had one final card to play, a card that could destroy Elena and the Volkov family in a single move. The county courthouse was packed that morning, the first day of the trial. Reporters from across the country poured in, cameras and microphones lining the hallways. This was no longer an ordinary criminal case. It had become a symbol of the fight between power and justice, between those who believed money could buy everything and those who dared to say no. Bradley Harrison walked into the courtroom in a gray suit, but much of his former shine had dulled. Nights in jail had left their marks on his face, shadows under his eyes, stubble that was not quite shaved clean, skin turned sallow from a lack of sunlight. But his eyes were still arrogant as ever, still looking at everyone around him as if they were insects beneath his heel. Beside Bradley sat his defense attorney, a public defender appointed by the court because no one of stature in the legal world wanted to be associated with him anymore. The young lawyer, though talented, was clearly uneasy to be seated next to a man the entire country now despised. Elena sat on the witness bench, Sophia beside her with her arms still in a cast. The 17-year-old had insisted on coming despite Elena's objections, saying she wanted to see with her own eyes the man who hurt her forced to face justice. Elena gripped her sister's hand, trying to hold herself steady even as her heart beat wildly. She turned to look toward the back and froze. In the last row, Margaret Volkov sat with her usual elegance, and beside her was Alexander. It was the first time Elena had seen mother and son together. Alexander wore a black suit, his face unreadable, but when his gaze met Elena's, he gave a small nod, a quiet gesture of encouragement. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a voice that carried authority, began presenting the case. The video from Rosie's diner played on a large screen, every moment examined with painstaking care. The slap across Margaret's face, the insults thrown at Elena, the second slap, and finally the threat Bradley delivered as he left. The courtroom fell completely silent when the video ended. Then came the testimony of the 5 women victims, each one stepping up to the witness stand and telling her story. 20 years of suffering, fear, and silence spilled into that room. The prosecutor presented Sophia's medical records, photographs of her bruised face and broken arm, along with threatening messages sent from a phone number police had traced to one of Bradley's employees. Margaret Volkov was called to the stand. She walked with the composure of someone who had lived through many storms and would not be shaken by one more. She described what happened at Rosie's diner in a clear, steady voice, without embellishment or exaggeration. Bradley's attorney rose to cross-examine her, and Elena realized this was the moment the defense had been waiting for. "Mrs. Volkov, do you know what your son does for a living?" The prosecutor stood at once. "Objection, Your Honor. That question is not relevant to this case." Sustained. The judge struck the gavel. "Defense counsel, keep your questions within the relevant scope." Margaret looked directly at the defense attorney, her eyes bright with intelligence and calm. "My son is a businessman, but this trial is about what Mr. Harrison did, not about my family." Elena was called next. She stepped up with legs that trembled slightly, but with her head held high. She recounted every detail of that day, every word Bradley had said. "He called me useless trash. He said women like me only belonged on their knees at men's feet. He asked my name so he could know whose life to destroy." The defense attorney stood, her expression trying to appear friendly, though the sharpness behind it showed. "Ms. Martinez, is it possible you deliberately provoked my client? Is it possible you inserted yourself into a situation that did not involve you and triggered a reaction from Mr. Harrison?" Elena looked the attorney in the eye, then looked at Bradley, then turned her gaze to the jury. "I stood between him and an older woman he had just attacked. If that is provocation, then yes, I provoked him." The courtroom went silent. The prosecutor announced the prosecution had rested. Everything seemed clear. The video was proof no one could deny. The witnesses had spoken the truth. The medical records and threatening messages had been placed before the court. It felt like a certain victory, but when Elena looked toward the defense table, she saw Bradley Harrison smiling. It was not the smile of a man who was losing. It was the smile of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the killing blow. And that smile made the blood in Elena's veins turn cold. The second day of the trial began with a surprise no one saw coming. Bradley Harrison, instead of letting his defense attorney continue the cross-examination, requested permission to take the stand and testify on his own behalf. The judge frowned but allowed it, and Bradley stepped up with a confidence that seemed to have vanished in recent days, only to return now as if it had never left. "Your Honor," Bradley began, his voice carrying through the courtroom, "I am not the villain here. I am the victim." A murmur rippled immediately through the room. Bradley lifted a hand, signaling for silence. "I have been the target of an organized attack by one of the most dangerous crime families in the United States, the Volkov family. Elena felt as if someone had just driven a fist into her stomach. She looked at Sophia, then toward the back, where Margaret and Alexander sat. Alexander's face remained calm, but she saw his jaw tighten. "I have evidence," Bradley continued, and his defense attorney stood, handing the court clerk a thick stack of documents. "This is a photograph of Elena Martinez receiving cash from Viktor Petrov, Alexander Volkov's right hand, only days after the incident at the diner." The image flashed onto the screen, and Elena felt the blood drain from her face. In the picture, she stood on a sidewalk while a man she had never met was handing her a thick envelope. But that could not have happened. She had never taken money from anyone. "And this," Bradley went on, his voice rich with triumph, "is a recording of a call between Alexander Volkov and his lawyer, discussing a plan to destroy Harrison and ensure he never raises his head again." Sound poured from the speakers, a voice Elena recognized as Alexander's, cold and ruthless, talking about using every resource to crush Bradley Harrison. In addition, Bradley pointed to another packet. "Here is proof that Volkov Industries secretly funded reporter Sarah Chen, who wrote the defamatory article about me. This was all arranged from the beginning." He turned to the jury, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "This was never about justice. This is a character assassination carried out by the Volkov Mafia against me, a man who dared to stand up to their influence in this city." The courtroom reeled. Jurors traded uncertain looks, then looked at Elena, then looked toward Alexander and Margaret in the back row. The air in the room had changed completely in only minutes. Elena felt as if the floor was dropping away beneath her feet. She had taken no money. She had refused Alexander's help. She had done everything on her own, but how could she prove that? How could she prove something that did not exist? Sophia squeezed her hand, her face gone pale. In the back row, Margaret gripped her son's hand, and Alexander whispered something Elena could not hear. "It is all forged," he said. His voice meant only for his mother. "All of it, but how could they prove that before the jury made its decision?" Elena stood, her heart battering her ribs but her voice steady. "Your Honor, I ask permission to speak." The judge studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Granted. But keep it brief, Ms. Martinez." Elena stepped into the center of the courtroom, facing the jury, facing Bradley Harrison, facing a world that was suddenly measuring her with suspicion. "Mr. Harrison says I took money from the Volkov family. Then let me tell you about my finances." She pulled a bundle of papers from her bag. "These are copies of my bank statements from the last 3 years. Every transaction, every dollar in and out. You can check every single line." She handed the documents to the clerk. "I work 2 jobs. I owe $47,000 in hospital bills from when my mother died. I live in the cheapest rented apartment I could find." Elena looked straight at the jury. "If I had been paid to do this, do you not think I would have paid my debt?" A few quiet laughs broke out in the courtroom, and Elena felt the air begin to shift. "And as for those recordings and documents," she continued, her voice stronger now, "I have something better than evidence. I have the truth that I have nothing." She turned to Bradley and met his eyes. "I have no connection to the Volkov family, no history with them, no reason to lie for them. I am just a waitress who saw a man slap an older woman and decided not to look away." Elena faced the jury again. "But Bradley Harrison has everything. Money, power, connections. And he still chose to hit an elderly woman and threaten a waitress. That is not what a victim does. That is what a bully does when he finally meets someone who will not bow." The courtroom fell into complete silence. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we request a forensic expert to analyze the evidence the defendant has just presented." The judge agreed, and within an hour a digital imaging forensic specialist was brought into court. He worked quickly and professionally, examining each photograph and each recording Bradley had presented. "This photograph has been altered," the expert declared, pointing at the screen. "The metadata shows it was created only 2 weeks ago, not on the date the defendant claims. In addition, there are clear compositing artifacts around the area surrounding the subject." He moved to the audio recording. "This recording also shows signs of manipulation. There are discontinuities in the audio frequency that indicate separate segments have been stitched together. This is not a continuous conversation." Bradley lurched to his feet. "Impossible. My people assured me that." He stopped, realizing what he had just said. The judge looked at him with eyes cold as ice. "Mr. Harrison, you have just admitted to hiring someone to fabricate evidence. One more sound from you, and I will hold you in contempt of court." Bradley collapsed back into his chair, his face drained white as paper. He had gambled everything on one final lie, and it had just exploded in front of him. The jury no longer looked at him with doubt. They looked at him with disgust. The courtroom tightened with tension as the prosecutor rose to deliver his closing argument. He stepped toward the jury, his stern gaze sweeping over every face. "Bradley Harrison is a predator," he said, his voice echoing in the hushed room. "He spent 20 years using his power to harm people who could not fight back. The women he harassed stayed silent out of fear. The victims he threatened lowered their heads because they had no other choice. He believed he was untouchable, that money and power could buy everyone's silence." The prosecutor paused, pointing toward Elena, until he met this young woman, a waitress with nothing but courage. She refused to look away. She stood up when everyone else bowed their heads, and for that, he had her sister's arm broken, a 17-year-old innocent girl. He turned toward Bradley, his voice edged with contempt. "Today, you have the chance to show him that no one is above the law. No one, no matter how rich or powerful, has the right to treat other people like garbage." Bradley's defense attorney rose, exhaustion plain on her face. She knew she was losing, but she still had to try, because it was her job. "My client made a mistake. I do not deny that. But he does not deserve to have his life destroyed over a moment of losing control. He has a family, a career, contributions to the community. I ask you to consider." The prosecutor stood and cut her off. "Say that to the 5 women he silenced for 20 years. Say that to the 17-year-old girl in the hospital with a broken arm. Say that to everyone Bradley Harrison crushed under his heel because they dared to stand against him." The judge struck the gavel. "The jury may withdraw to deliberate." 12 men and women rose and filed into the private room. The door shut, and the waiting began. Elena sat frozen in her seat, gripping Sophia's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. She did not dare to hope. She had seen too many times in her life how people with money and power slipped free of consequences. She had learned that justice did not always win. Sophia held on to her sister's hand, her casted arm resting against Elena as if searching for comfort. The girl said nothing. She was simply there, and her presence was everything Elena needed. In the back row, Margaret Volkov closed her eyes, her lips moving as if in silent prayer. Alexander sat beside his mother, his face still unreadable, but his eyes never left Elena for even a second. 35 minutes. That was all the jury needed to reach a verdict. When the deliberation room door opened and they filed back in, Elena felt her heart stop. 35 minutes was too fast. What did it mean? Guilty that quickly, or an acquittal? The foreperson, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and severe eyes, stood. The entire courtroom held its breath. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the man answered. "Please read the verdict." He looked down at the paper in his hand, then raised his head and stared straight at Bradley Harrison. "We, the jury, find the defendant Bradley Harrison III." The room seemed to stop breathing. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Applause, cheers, sobbing, all of it crashing together. Reporters surged up to snap photographs. The 5 women victims clung to one another and wept. Bradley Harrison collapsed into his chair like a puppet with its strings cut. His face went paper white, his eyes empty, staring into nothing, as if he could not believe what had just happened. Elena did not cry. She only exhaled, a long breath, as if setting down a weight she had carried on her shoulders for weeks. The judge hammered for order, and the room slowly fell quiet again. "The court will sentence now," she said. She looked down at Bradley, her gaze holding not a trace of pity. "Bradley Harrison III, for assault, threats, hiring someone to cause injury, and evidence fraud in this court, I sentence you to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation after your release." Bradley let out a sound, but the judge was not finished. "You will pay $500,000 in restitution to the victims. In addition, I recommend that the bar permanently revoke your license to practice law." The judge rose, her eyes fixed on Bradley. "Mr. Harrison, you spent your entire career protecting powerful people from the consequences of their actions. Today, you face the consequences of your own." The gavel fell one final time. "Court is adjourned." 2 bailiffs approached, cuffed Bradley, and led him away. As he passed Elena's row, Bradley stopped, his eyes igniting with hatred. "This is not over," he snarled. Elena stood, facing the man who had once terrified her, the man who had hurt her sister, the man who had tried to destroy her life. But now, she was not afraid. "Goodbye, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice calm and steady. "For me, it is over." Bradley was led out, the courtroom doors closing behind him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Elena like bees. Microphones and cameras jabbed toward her from every direction. Questions shouted over one another. Ms. Martinez, how do you feel after the verdict? Do you have a message for other victims of violence? What is your plan next? Elena stopped and looked into the crowd of reporters and lenses. I am not a hero. I am just someone who refused to look away. She tightened her grip on Sophia's hand. If there is one thing I want to say, it is this. Never stay silent when you witness injustice. Even if you think you are small, even if you think you have no power, your voice still matters. And sometimes, one voice is all it takes to change everything. The crowd parted when Margaret Volkov stepped forward. She wrapped Elena in a hug, warm and deeply maternal. You saved more than me that day, my girl, she whispered. You saved yourself. Elena hugged her back, feeling the warmth and the soft trace of expensive perfume. Over Margaret's shoulder, she saw Alexander standing a few steps away, not moving closer because of the press, but his eyes still on her. He gave a small nod, a quiet gesture heavy with meaning. Elena nodded back, a thank you that did not need words. Elena Martinez left the courthouse with only her sister's hand in her own. No money, no fame, no Volkov empire, only the truth that she had stood up, she had fought, and she had won, in her own way. 6 months passed like a dream. Elena Martinez stood before the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting the collar of her white blouse before heading to class. She still could not believe she was back in medical school after so many years of thinking that dream had died. The scholarship came from the Victims of Violence Support Fund, completely legitimate, completely earned, not a single cent from the Volkov family. She had checked that carefully before accepting, because she needed to know that everything she had was because of herself. In the afternoons, she still worked part-time at Rosie's diner. The diner had reopened after every alleged health code violation was proven to be fabricated. Rosa had cried as she hung the open sign back on the door, and Elena had stood beside her, welcoming the first customers back. The $47,000 in hospital debt was being paid down gradually from the restitution the court ordered Bradley to pay. No more sleepless nights worrying over bills, no more counting every penny at the grocery store. Elena was still not wealthy, still had to work hard, but for the first time in years, she could breathe without feeling a weight pressed tight against her chest. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, textbooks scattered all around her. Her arm had healed completely, leaving only a faint scar, a reminder of what had happened. She was 18 now, a first-year pre-med student at the university she had dreamed of since she was little. Sister. Sophia looked up from the pile of books, her eyes bright with a determination Elena recognized as her own. I want to be a doctor so I can help people like us. People who are hurt and no one believes them. Elena walked over and smoothed her sister's hair. You already are that kind of person, Soph. The Volkov Fund for Survivors was established 3 months after the trial. Margaret Volkov organized it herself, using the family name and resources to create a refuge for victims of violence and abuse. Elena was invited to serve on the board, a volunteer position without pay that she accepted immediately. You taught my son something I could not teach him, my girl, Margaret told her during a board meeting, her eyes warm with love. Elena tipped her head. What was that? That sometimes the strongest thing we can do is not use our power, Margaret said with a smile. Alexander was ready to burn the whole world down for me. But you showed him that real justice does not come from revenge. It comes from standing up for what is right, even when you have nothing in your hands. Somewhere else, behind the gray walls of a federal prison, Bradley Harrison wore an orange uniform and held a broom, sweeping the cafeteria floor. It was part of the court-mandated work program, and every day he had to work beside people he once would not have deigned to look at. Migrant laborers, unhoused men sent through rehabilitation, people Bradley used to call trash. He did not feel remorse. In his mind, he was still the victim of a conspiracy, still the one who had been treated unfairly, but none of that mattered anymore. He no longer had the power to hurt anyone, no money left to buy silence, no connections left to shield his cruelty. He was only a number in the system, and for the first time in his life, he had to live like the people he once despised. Every Tuesday, Alexander Volkov appeared at Rosie's diner. Not every day, not constantly, only once a week. He sat in the familiar corner booth, ordered a black coffee, and read the newspaper while Elena worked. He demanded nothing. He did not ask her to sit and talk. He did not act possessive or jealous when she served other customers. He was simply there, a quiet, patient presence. Rosa stood beside Elena behind the counter, watching Alexander with a knowing look. That man looks at you like you are the only thing that truly exists in his world. Rosa. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I am only saying what I see, Mija. Rosa chuckled. And I have lived long enough to know when a man is waiting, not hunting. He is waiting until you are ready. And he will wait as long as it takes. Elena looked toward Alexander. As if he felt her eyes on him, he lifted his head. And for a moment, their eyes met. He did not smile, did not wave. He only looked at her with something she still did not fully understand. Then he lowered his gaze and went back to his newspaper. And Elena turned back to her work. 6 months ago, Elena Martinez was an anonymous waitress with nothing to lose. Today, she was still a waitress, still paying debt, still working 2 jobs. But something had changed. She had proven, to the world and to herself, that one person could make a difference. And that was worth more than any amount of money or power. Tuesday came again, and Rosie's diner was lively as always. The smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries filled the cozy space, and the laughter and chatter of regulars made an easy soundtrack for an ordinary day. Margaret Volkov walked in at exactly noon, as she always did, her silver hair pinned neatly up and a warm smile on her lips. Elena greeted her at the door, and the two of them hugged as if they had known each other their whole lives, not just a few months. What they had was far beyond the line between customer and waitress now. It had become a sincere friendship between 2 generations of strong women. In the familiar corner booth, Alexander Volkov sat with a cup of black coffee and the morning paper. He did not look up when Elena guided his mother to her table, but Elena knew he was tracking every step she took. After Margaret was settled with her usual menu, Elena walked over to Alexander's table. "You have been coming here for months now," she said, one hand on her hip, a faint smile on her mouth. Alexander lifted his head, blue eyes meeting her brown ones. "The coffee is good here, liar." Alexander smiled, a rare, real smile Elena had learned to recognize over these past months. "All right, the company is better." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "I never thanked you the right way. For all of it. You did everything yourself, Elena." Alexander set the newspaper down, his gaze turning serious. "I only watched. You did more than that. Maybe, but you did not need me. That is the point." Before Elena could answer, the diner door opened and a man walked in. He wore an expensive suit, a glittering gold watch, and the kind of arrogant attitude Elena knew too well. He scanned the diner with contempt, his lips tightening at the sight of old tables and a simple menu. "Where is the server?" he barked, irritation thick in his voice. "I need a clean table immediately, and someone mop this floor. It looks like a pigsty." His eyes landed on Margaret, sitting with quiet elegance at the nearby table. He looked her up and down with disgust, as if the presence of an older woman in a working-class diner was something offensive. He opened his mouth, ready to say whatever he had come here to say. But before a single word could leave him, Elena stepped in front of him. She was not afraid. She was not aggressive. She simply stood there, calm and steady as stone. "Sir, in this diner, we treat everyone with respect, including the woman you were just staring at." The man blinked, not used to a waitress speaking to him that way. He started to argue, but then he looked around. Alexander Volkov was watching him with eyes cold as ice, one hand resting lightly on the table, yet radiating a quiet threat. Rosa stood behind the counter with a phone already ready in her hand, her gaze sharp, and all through the diner, every customer had turned to look, silently watching, waiting to see what he would do next. The man swallowed. Without another word, he turned and walked out, the door closing behind him. Margaret looked at Elena with pride shining in her eyes. "You have built something here, my girl. What is that?" "A place where bullies know they are not welcome." Alexander stood, leaving money on the table with a generous tip as always. He walked past Elena, pausing close enough for her to catch his whisper. "Have dinner with me." Elena smiled, not turning to look at him. "Ask me again when you are not a mystery anymore. I am trying. I know. That is why I said when, not no." Alexander stepped out of the diner, and for the first time, Elena saw him truly smile. A bright smile she had never seen on that cold face. Inside Rosie's diner, under the watchful eyes of ordinary people who refused to stay silent, everyone was safe. Not because of money, not because of power, not because of fear, but because a waitress had decided that courage mattered more than safety. This story brings us a profound lesson about courage and the value of standing up for what is right. Sometimes, real strength is not found in money or power, but in the hearts of those who dare to say no to injustice. Elena Martinez proved that an ordinary person, with nothing in her hands but courage, can still create a powerful change. Have you ever stood up to protect someone when everyone else looked away? Have you ever discovered that the smallest voice can create the loudest echo? What thoughts does this story awaken in you about real life? We truly want to hear what you feel from the deepest part of your heart. Leave a comment beneath the video so we can talk together. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share the video with the people you love, and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss moving stories every day. Because in a world where bullies often win, the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to bow. Sometimes, the hero is not the one with power, it is the one with courage. We sincerely thank you for staying with us until the very last moment. We wish you and your family strong health, a life full of joy and peace every day. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.